The wheels of the suitcase catch on the kitchen tile, and Erin Kessler almost trips over her own feet, keys still hanging from 2 fingers, coat still smelling like recycled airplane air. Claire? Nothing answers her. The dishwasher is running, which means someone was home recently enough to start a load, but the sound is the only sound in the whole house, humming under a silence so complete it has a texture, like something you could press your palm against. Maddie? Still nothing. She sets the suitcase down in the hallway, and it topples slowly, gently onto its side, the way things fall when nobody is there to see them do it. She walks past the coat closet first, out of habit, the way you check the places you always check, and that is when she notices the hangers. Claire's side is not empty. That would almost be easier to understand. An empty closet has a story that makes sense, but it is thinned out in a particular way, the way a closet looks when someone has packed carefully, has thought about what she will need and what she can leave behind, has taken the gray cardigan and left the blue one. On the floor of the entryway, where a small pair of sneakers with light-up soles usually sits kicked off and abandoned, there is nothing but a rectangle of clean floor slightly lighter than the tile around it, dust outlining an absence. Erin's hands are shaking before her mind catches up to why. She walks into the kitchen, and on the island, dead center, angled like it was placed there on purpose, and not dropped in a hurry, sits a single paper airplane. She knows this paper airplane. She has known 100 versions of this paper airplane for 2 years, has found them tucked into the side pocket of her carry-on, folded into the pages of her boarding passes, taped once, memorably, to the bathroom mirror of a hotel in Denver. She has never, not once, found one waiting for her at home, aimed at the door, like a message meant to be the first thing she saw. She picks it up. Her hands are shaking hard enough now that unfolding it takes 3 tries, and when she finally gets the paper open, flattening the creases with fingers that do not feel like her own, she cannot read the words right away. Not because the handwriting is bad. Maddie's handwriting, at 10, is careful, almost proud, the handwriting of a kid who has been told her whole life that she writes beautifully and has decided to believe it. Erin cannot read the words because her eyes will not focus, because somewhere underneath the confusion, a much older, much more animal part of her already knows what the note is going to say, already knows this is the day the arithmetic of her life finally came due. She stands in the middle of her own kitchen, in a house that is objectively, undeniably empty, holding a piece of paper folded into wings, and she does not yet know where her wife and her daughter have gone, or whether this is the kind of leaving that comes back. To understand how Erin Kessler ended up standing alone in that kitchen, you have to go back 18 months, to a January so cold in the Chicago suburbs that the school district called a snow day for the 3rd time that month, and Maddie built a blanket fort in the living room that stayed up, in one form or another, for 11 days. Back then, the house did not feel empty. It felt, if anything, almost too full of the particular chaos of a family of 3, trying to keep 3 different clocks running on the same 24 hours. Claire Donnelly worked 3 shifts a week at the Children's Hospital downtown, down from 5, a decision she had made when Maddie started kindergarten and never fully unmade, though she talked about it sometimes, in the careful, testing way people talk about doors they are not sure they are allowed to open again. Erin worked, officially, 40 hours a week for a mid-sized logistics and supply chain firm called Halverson Rourke, and unofficially however many hours it took to be the person in the room whose name people remembered when a problem needed solving. They had met 9 years earlier at a hospital fundraiser. Neither of them had wanted to attend. Claire dragged there by a colleague. Erin there, because her firm had bought a table, and someone from marketing needed to not be the only person representing the company. Claire likes to tell the story of that night as though it were funny, how Erin spent 20 minutes explaining supply chain resilience to a table of pediatric nurses who had absolutely no interest in supply chain resilience, how Claire had finally leaned over and said, not unkindly, "You know we save children's lives for a living, right? You can stop selling us something." Erin likes to tell the story as though it were the moment she understood, with total clarity, that she had just met someone who would never be impressed by her job title, and that this terrified her and delighted her in equal measure. Maddie came 4 years later, after 2 rounds of a fertility process that neither of them talks about in detail even now, Claire carrying her, Erin in the delivery room holding a hand so tightly the nurse eventually had to ask her to loosen her grip. Erin adopted Maddie legally within the year, a stack of paperwork that took longer than either of them expected, and that Erin, to this day, keeps in a fireproof box in the office closet, because some part of her has never fully stopped being afraid that a piece of paper is the only thing standing between her and the possibility of not counting. That fear, it turns out, explains more about Erin Kessler than almost anything else in her life. Her own mother, Barbara Kessler, had raised 3 kids largely alone after Erin's father left when Erin was 7, working 2 jobs, sometimes 3, and Erin had grown up watching her mother's exhaustion as though it were a warning label. The lesson she absorbed, without anyone teaching it to her directly, was that love without provision was a kind of negligence, that you kept people safe by keeping the money coming, and that the way you proved you would never leave was by making sure you would never have to. It is not a lesson anyone told her out loud. It is simply the shape the world had pressed into her, the way water takes the shape of whatever glass it is poured into. So when Maddie was 2 years old and starting to need things, daycare, then preschool, then a pediatric specialist for the ear infections that would not quit, Erin took the promotion that came with more travel. When Maddie was 5, Erin took the one after that. By the time Maddie was 8, Erin was a senior account director who flew out most Mondays and flew back most Thursdays, and the family had built an entire architecture of small rituals around her absence, the way people build storm shutters around a house that floods every season. Not because the flooding is fine, but because you learn to live around what you cannot stop. That was the year the paper airplanes started. It began almost by accident, on a Sunday night when Maddie, 8 years old and furious about a trip that would make Erin miss her school's fall festival for the 2nd year running, had stormed off to her room instead of saying goodnight. An hour later, when Erin went in to check on her, Maddie was asleep, and on Erin's pillow, not her own, Erin's, on the side of the bed no one had slept in that week, sat a paper airplane. Erin had unfolded it in the dark, squinting at a flashlight to read 8-year-old handwriting that said, simply, "I hope your plane doesn't miss me too, plane." Erin had cried in a way she had not let herself cry in years, sitting on the edge of the bed at 11 at night, and the next morning she had tucked the little paper plane into the interior pocket of her carry-on, where it stayed the entire trip, and when she came home, Maddie asked, very seriously, whether it had worked, whether the plane had kept the real plane company. Erin said yes, and so it became the thing they did. Maddie folding a plane before every trip, sometimes a wish, sometimes a joke, sometimes just her name written over and over in different colors, and Erin carrying it with her the way other people carry a coin or a rosary, a small manageable object standing in for something too large to hold directly. Claire watched this ritual take root with a complicated tenderness, because it was beautiful, and because it was also, if she was honest with herself in the handful of minutes she allowed herself for honesty most days, a coping mechanism her daughter had invented for a problem the adults in the house were not fixing. Claire had her own rituals too, though nobody had given them a name. She had the 15 minutes after Maddie's bedtime when she sat on the closed lid of the toilet in the master bathroom and cried, briefly, efficiently, the way you'd wring out a washcloth, before washing her face and going back downstairs to grade nothing and worry about everything. She had gotten so practiced at this that Erin, on the trips she was home to witness it, genuinely did not know it was happening. Claire had made sure of that. She had decided, somewhere in the accumulating years, that her grief was hers to carry, that adding it to Erin's load would only slow down the thing Erin was running toward, and that the running, at least, was in service of something. A house, a school fund, a life that looked, from a certain angle, successful. Before we go any further, if this story is already sitting somewhere behind your ribs, if you know a version of Erin or a version of Claire, or you've been the kid folding something small to hold on to something big, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. There are more stories like this one, about the quiet math families do without saying the numbers out loud, and I'd rather tell them with you than without you. Now, back to that January, back to the fort that stayed up for 11 days, back to the last stretch of ordinary life this family would have before everything tilted. Halverson Rourke, the firm Aaron worked for, ran on a particular kind of currency: visibility. It did not matter, in practice, how good your work was, if you were not in the room when the good work got attributed. Erin had learned this early and had built her entire career around being willing to be in the room. The client dinner in Atlanta, the site visit in Reno, the emergency contract renegotiation in Toronto that ran 4 days over schedule. Her boss, a regional VP named Grant Ellison, was fond of saying, in meetings, that he could always count on Erin, and he said it the way you'd say a compliment, though Erin had noticed, without quite letting herself examine the noticing, that being the person someone can always count on tends to mean being the person whose time is never protected, because protected time is time you might say no with. Grant had a mentee once, a woman named Priya Anand, who Erin had admired from a distance for years. The first woman to make regional partner at Halverson Rourke, a name people said with a certain reverence in the hallway. Priya had, at various points, been held up to Erin as an example, the kind of career that proved it could be done, that a woman could climb all the way to the top of that particular ladder without apologizing for it. Erin did not know Priya well, not yet. That would come later, and it would come with information attached that Erin had not asked for and would not be able to unlearn. The detail that would matter most, the small mechanical part that the whole story eventually turns on, was a folded piece of paper sitting in the bottom of Erin's carry-on that January, worn soft at the creases from handling, the ink slightly faded, reading, in Maddie's 7-year-old scrawl, "Mommy, come home." Erin had kept that one longer than the others, past the trip it was meant for, past several trips after that, without quite deciding to. It lived in the bag like a stone in a shoe you've stopped noticing. It would resurface. Everything you don't deal with resurfaces eventually. That is simply how time works. The evening that changed the shape of everything came on a Tuesday in March, 18 months before Erin would stand alone in an empty kitchen holding a different paper airplane entirely. Grant called Erin into his office at 4:45, which was already a bad sign, because Grant did his real business in the hour before people started leaving, when he knew you'd stay to hear him out, rather than risk looking like you were rushing off. He had a proposal, he said, closing the door behind her. The firm was launching a new division, West Coast Expansion, a project with the kind of budget that got people's names attached to buildings eventually, and he needed someone to lead the transition team. Someone who could be on planes, a lot of planes. Realistically, he said, every week for the next 6 months, sometimes longer stretches, sometimes 2 cities in one trip. It would mean a promotion, regional VP. It would mean, unofficially, being fast-tracked toward the kind of role Priya Anand held. Erin said yes, before she had finished the sentence, "Let me think about it," in her own head. She said yes out loud, in the room, to Grant, before she had said a single word to Claire. She told herself, walking to her car in the parking garage, phone already in her hand, that this was simply how these decisions worked, that hesitating would have signaled weakness, that the offer might not still be on the table in the morning, that this was, ultimately, for the family, the same sentence she had used for every promotion before this one, worn smooth now from overuse, the way a phrase gets smooth when you say it enough times to stop hearing what it actually claims. Claire's silence on the phone that night lasted 4 full seconds. Erin counted them without meaning to, before she said, carefully, 6 months of nearly every week? And Erin said yes, and explained the title, the money, the trajectory, all of it delivered in the practiced cadence of someone pitching a client, and somewhere in the middle of that pitch she heard herself and could not stop. Claire did not fight her on it that night. This is a detail that will matter later. Claire did not fight her on almost anything. Not that night, not in the weeks after, not when the travel schedule came through and it was, if anything, worse than promised. What Claire did instead was quieter and, in its way, more devastating, though neither of them would understand that for a long time. 3 weeks after that phone call, the pediatric unit where Claire worked posted an internal opening for a nurse coordinator position. More hours, but also, finally, the kind of role Claire had trained for and wanted and had put on pause the year Maddie started kindergarten. Claire's supervisor pulled her aside and told her, warmly, that she should absolutely apply, that she'd be a lock for it. Claire never submitted the application. She told no one she had been asked. She deleted the confirmation email from the recruiting portal 3 days after receiving it, sitting in the hospital parking lot in her car, with the engine still running, and she told herself, in words nearly identical to the ones Erin had used on the phone, that this was simply how these decisions worked, that someone needed to be the fixed point while the other person orbited, and that her holding still was, ultimately, for the family too. Neither of them said any of this to the other. This is the shape their marriage had taken without either of them fully choosing it. Two people making enormous, self-erasing sacrifices in parallel, each one certain the other didn't see the size of what they were giving up. Each one, in a strange way, protecting the other from the full weight of the bill. The flight for Erin's first extended trip under the new role left on a Thursday morning in April, and Claire drove all three of them to O'Hare together, because Maddie had asked to come, had asked with an intensity that should have told them something, though at 7:15 in the morning with a flight to catch, intensity in a 10-year-old reads mostly as a Tuesday. At the gate, past security, in the long beige stretch of carpet where 100 other small departures were also underway, Maddie held Erin's hand instead of hugging her goodbye the way she usually did, held it the way you hold something you are trying to keep from floating away, and she looked up, not crying yet, that would come a second later, but her face already arranged around the shape of the thing she was about to say, and she said, "Don't go." Erin crouched down, already smiling in the particular practiced way parents smile when they are trying to make a hard thing sound smaller than it is, and Maddie did not let her finish whatever reassurance she had started to build. "Mommy cries every time you leave," she said. "Every single time. I hear her in the bathroom. She thinks I don't, but I do." There is a particular kind of silence that follows a child telling the truth in a public place. Erin felt it close over the gate area like weather. Claire, standing a few feet back with her arms crossed over her chest, did not deny it. She did not have it in her, apparently in that moment, to perform the reassurance that adults are supposed to perform for children. She simply stood there, and her eyes filled, right there under the fluorescent lights, in front of the gate agent and the standby list, and the 24 strangers scrolling on their phones, and Maddie watched it happen in real time, the exact thing she had just described, confirmed in front of her like evidence. Erin looked at her daughter's face, and she looked at her wife's face, and she felt the entire architecture of her justification, the trajectory, the money, the 6 months that would supposedly buy them a different life on the other side of it, buckle slightly, like a shelf under too much weight, and she still, in the end, when the boarding call came, stood up, kissed the top of Maddie's head, told her she loved her more than airplanes, more than anything with wings, and got on the flight. She did not know it yet, but that was the moment the story that led to an empty kitchen actually began, though it would take another year for the last board to give way. If you've stayed with me this far, you already know this isn't the kind of story that resolves in the next 5 minutes, and I think that's exactly why it's worth staying for. Keep watching, because what happens next will make you look differently at every "just this once" you've ever said to someone you love. What followed that spring and summer was not a single dramatic collapse, but something slower and, in its way, harder to see coming, an accumulation. Erin's trips stacked on top of each other, sometimes with barely 36 hours at home between them, long enough to do laundry and sign a school form and fall asleep on the couch during a movie Maddie had begged her to watch. Claire's shifts at the hospital did not change, because Claire had made sure of that, quietly absorbing every gap the way water finds the low points in a floor. The first real crack came in June, at Maddie's regional spelling bee. She had made it further than anyone expected, further than she herself expected, and the final round was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon that Erin had, months earlier, blocked off in her calendar in red letters that said, "Do not book." Grant booked over it anyway, in the particular way that emergencies at that level of a company always seem to happen on exactly the days you've protected. An in-person closing meeting with a client in Seattle that the deal team insisted could not happen by video call, not for a contract this size, not with a client this important. Erin fought it for exactly one day. She asked whether someone else could go. She was told, gently but unmistakably, that this was precisely the kind of visibility opportunity the new role was designed around, that missing it would send a signal, that Grant had specifically asked for her. She told herself she would make the recital by rerouting through a connection that landed her back in Chicago 4 hours before the spelling bee started, a plan with exactly enough margin to feel possible and exactly enough margin to fail, which it did, when the connecting flight sat on the tarmac in Denver for 2 hours, waiting out a ground stop that no one could have predicted and no one could do anything about. Erin landed to 11 text messages from Claire, arranged like a timeline of hope curdling into something else. The first ones were logistical. "What gate? I'll swing by. We might just make it if we hurry." Then, as the delay stretched, they got shorter. "Still nothing?" "They're announcing the top 10. And then, the last one, sent 40 minutes before Erin's plane finally touched down, 4 words with no punctuation at all, which somehow made it worse. She made it to finals. Maddie had placed 4th in the entire region. She had done it without her mother in the audience, had looked, Claire told Erin later in a voice flattened by exhaustion rather than anger, which was somehow worse than anger, out into the crowd at the exact moment they called her name for 4th place, looking for a face that was not there, and had smiled anyway, for the crowd, the particular brave performing smile of a child who has already learned not to expect everyone to show up. Erin did not find out about the secret nursing coordinator position until the following month, and she did not find out from Claire. She found out because Claire's supervisor mentioned it in passing at a hospital fundraiser dinner Erin attended in Claire's place. Claire had a shift, congratulating Erin on Claire's restraint, saying, with the easy warmth of someone who assumed this was shared information between spouses, "I still think she'd have been perfect for the coordinator role. It's a shame the timing never worked out for her to apply." Erin smiled and nodded and said something appropriately vague, and drove home with both hands gripping the wheel at 10 and 2, doing the math on what the timing meant, understanding with a lurch that her wife had quietly declined the exact kind of leap Erin herself had taken without a second thought, and had never once mentioned it, not to make Erin feel guilty, not to ask for anything, simply because Claire had decided her own ambition was the thing the family could afford to lose. That was the night Erin sat in the driveway for 11 minutes before going inside, staring at the light in the kitchen window, understanding for the first time the actual shape of the arrangement they had built, not 2 people supporting each other's dreams in sequence, taking turns, the way she had always narrated it to herself, but one person's dream expanding to fill all the available space, while the other person's folded itself smaller and smaller to fit around it, without a single conversation in which that trade was ever named out loud, let alone agreed to. She almost said something that night. She got as far as sitting down next to Claire on the couch, opening her mouth around the beginning of a sentence that might have changed everything if she had finished it. But Claire, exhausted from a double shift, had fallen asleep against her shoulder mid-sentence, and Erin, looking down at her wife's face gone soft and unguarded in sleep, decided the conversation could wait for a better moment. There is always, it turns out, a reason it can wait for a better moment. That is precisely the mechanism by which the important conversations never happen at all. It was around this time that Erin ran into Priya Anand again. This time not across a conference room, but in an airport lounge in Charlotte, both of them delayed on the same evening, and Priya, 3 drinks into what she called the only acceptable use of a 4-hour delay, told Erin things about her life that the hallway legend at Halverson Rourke had never included. Priya had made regional partner the same year her marriage ended. Her ex-husband had custody of their two sons during the school year. She saw them on video calls most nights and in person every other weekend, and for 6 weeks in the summer, an arrangement she described with a brightness that did not reach her eyes, the practiced brightness of someone who has explained this arrangement enough times to have a version of the explanation that doesn't make people uncomfortable at parties. "Everyone thinks I have it figured out," Priya said, turning her glass slowly on the little lounge table. "Because I got the thing everyone said I should want. Nobody asks what it cost, because the number is ugly, and ugly numbers don't fit on the slide." Erin sat with that in a way she could not put down for the rest of the trip. She had spent years holding Priya up, in the private ledger she kept of what a successful life could look like, as proof that the latter didn't have to cost you anything you couldn't afford. Sitting across from her in an airport bar in Charlotte, watching her check her phone for a message from a son who had not texted back in 2 days, Erin understood, for the first time with any real clarity, that the latter had simply presented Priya with a bill later than most people, and in a currency that didn't show up on any account Erin had access to. She flew home the next morning, determined to have the conversation with Claire she'd been circling for months. She got as far as the front door before Grant called with news that reset everything. The West Coast division had hit a snag with its anchor client, and the whole timeline was compressing, meaning the travel that was supposed to taper off by August would instead intensify through the fall, at least through Maddie's 10th birthday in October, possibly through the holidays. Erin stood in her own driveway, phone against her ear, and felt the conversation she had rehearsed the entire flight home simply evaporate, replaced by the practiced, familiar work of explaining to herself why this too was temporary, why this too was almost over, why the version of their life on the other side of this particular push would finally be the version where she got to be fully present, a version that kept receding at exactly the speed she approached it, the way a horizon does. She did not have the conversation with Claire that week, or the next. By September, something in Claire had gone quiet in a different register than before. Not the patient, absorbing quiet of the earlier years, but something with an edge underneath it, though Erin, moving through her days at the speed she moved through them, did not clock the difference in time to do anything about it. Maddie's paper airplanes had also changed. Where they used to carry jokes, drawings, wishes written in careful, hopeful handwriting, the more recent ones had gotten shorter, blunter, some of them just a single word. Please. Or, once, devastatingly, nothing at all, just Maddie's name folded into wings and left on the counter without a message, as though she had run out of things to ask for, and settled, instead, for simply being present in the shape of the thing she made. Erin found that one, the blank plane with just a name on it, 3 days before her trip to Seattle to close the anchor account deal, the trip Grant had been building toward for months, the trip that would, if it went well, secure the promotion for good. She found it on a Tuesday night, tucked in the side pocket of her bag, the way they always were, and she sat on the edge of the bed with it in her hands for a long time, in a scene that would echo, months later, in an entirely different key. The deal in Seattle was scheduled to close on a Friday. Maddie's 10th birthday fell on that same Friday, a fact Erin had known for a year, had blocked off for a year, the way she'd blocked off the spelling bee, in letters that this time said something closer to a plea than a calendar entry. 2 weeks before the trip, the client pushed the closing meeting up by a day, for reasons that had nothing to do with Erin or her family, and everything to do with a boardroom 3 states away, and there was, this time, genuinely no way to be in 2 places on the same afternoon. Not a scheduling inconvenience to be solved with a clever connection. An actual, structural impossibility. The client's board convened at 2 p.m. Pacific on Friday, which was the exact hour Maddie's birthday party started in a backyard 40 minutes from their house. Erin asked, one more time, whether someone else could close it. She was told, by Grant, in the specific tone people use when they've already decided the answer and are only performing the question, that this was the moment the entire 6 months had been building toward, that walking away now would undo the visibility she'd spent a year accumulating, that surely Claire understood what these things required. Erin went to Seattle. She missed the party. She called Maddie's phone. Claire had gotten her a phone for her 10th birthday, an irony that would sit uncomfortably with all three of them later, from the client's parking garage, and Maddie picked up on the fourth ring, out of breath, background noise of other kids' laughter behind her, and said, in a voice with something new in it, something careful and a little distant, "It's okay, Mom. I know you're busy." It was the politeness of the sentence that undid Erin more than anger would have. 10-year-olds are not supposed to reassure their parents. That is not supposed to be a job that belongs to them. The deal closed. Erin got the verbal confirmation of her promotion 3 days later, over email, a single paragraph from Grant with an exclamation point in it. She read it standing in a hotel bathroom in Seattle, brushing her teeth, and she did not feel the way she had always imagined she would feel reading that particular sentence. She felt, instead, a kind of hollow ringing, the sound a bell makes after it's been struck too many times. She flew home 2 days early, on a whim she did not examine too closely, telling herself she wanted to surprise them, wanted to walk in and take Maddie for the belated birthday dinner she'd promised, wanted, in some inarticulate way, to begin the conversation with Claire that she had been circling for the better part of a year, before the promotion made not having that conversation permanently easier. That is the flight that lands her back at the beginning of this story. The roller bag, the running dishwasher, the closet thinned out in a particular deliberate way, the sneakers missing from the mat, the single paper airplane sitting dead center on the kitchen island. When Erin finally gets her shaking hands to hold the paper still enough to read it, the words are not cruel. That, somehow, makes it worse. In Maddie's careful, proud handwriting, it says, "Going to Aunt Kate's for a while. Mom needs a break from being sad by herself. I'll still fold you plains. I just don't want to watch her cry in the bathroom anymore and pretend I don't hear it." There is no address. There does not need to be one. Erin knows exactly where Kate Donnelly lives, 40 minutes north, in a house with a trampoline in the backyard, and a husband, Danny, who splits school pickups with Kate down the middle of the week, without either of them ever making a production of it, the kind of ordinary, undramatic fairness that Erin had watched for years at Donnelly family gatherings, with an admiration she'd never examined closely enough to notice the envy folded inside it. She drives there that night with the note on the passenger seat beside her, and the 40-minute drive gives her more time to think than she has allowed herself in 18 months, which turns out to be both a mercy and an ambush. She thinks about the fourth-place spelling bee. She thinks about the birthday party she missed by 1 boardroom hour. She thinks about Priya Anand's brightness in an airport bar, and the sons who don't text back for 2 days. She thinks, with a clarity that arrives late and lands hard, about every version of herself that told Claire, "Just this one, and then it'll be different." And she counts, on the drive, how many times she actually said some version of that sentence, and she loses count somewhere past a dozen, which is its own kind of answer. Claire is sitting on Kate's back porch when Erin pulls into the driveway, a mug of tea gone cold in her hands, and she does not look surprised to see the car. She looks, if anything, tired in a way that has clearly been building for longer than 18 months, tired in the specific way of someone who has been holding a structure up with her own body for years, and has finally, quietly, set it down. "She's asleep," Claire says, before Erin can ask. "Kate's guest room." She cried for a while, and then she wasn't crying anymore, and I think that's worse, honestly, than not crying anymore. Erin sits down on the step below the porch, not next to Claire, because some instinct tells her she has not earned the space next to Claire tonight, and she says the only true thing she has, which is, "I don't know how to fix this from up here." I don't even know if fixing is the right word for what this needs. Claire is quiet for a long moment, turning the cold mug in her hands. "I don't think I want you to fix it," she says finally. "I think I want you to understand it. Those aren't the same thing, and you've spent our whole marriage treating them like they are. You hear a problem, you build a plan, you execute the plan, and the problem is supposed to be over. I don't have a plan for you to execute, Erin. I have 8 years of crying in a bathroom, so our daughter wouldn't have to watch. Except she watched anyway. because kids always do. And now she's the one comforting me at the airport instead of the other way around. And I don't know how you build a project timeline out of that. I turned it down, Erin says. It comes out before she's fully decided to say it. The promotion, the West Coast role, the whole architecture of the last 18 months. She had, in fact, not turned it down yet. The confirmation email was still sitting unanswered in her inbox. But sitting on that step, she understood that she was going to, that some decision had completed itself somewhere over Nebraska on the flight home, and she said it out loud before she could talk herself out of it, the way you sometimes have to say a true thing before you're sure you mean it, in order to find out that you do. Claire does not react the way Erin, on some level, had hoped she might, with relief, with the sense that the gesture settled the account. She looks almost sad hearing it. That's not actually the thing that was broken, she says. The thing that was broken isn't which job you take. It's that I stopped believing you'd choose us without me forcing the question. And I don't know how you undo 18 months of that with one phone call to Grant. She is right, and some part of Erin has known she would be right since the moment she read the note in the empty kitchen. There is no version of the following weeks that unfolds the way Erin's mind, still running on the operating system of problems that resolve when you apply enough effort, wants it to unfold. Claire and Maddie stay at Kate's for 6 weeks. Not a dramatic, door-slamming separation, but something quieter, and in some ways more frightening. A deliberate distance that neither of them calls a trial separation out loud, though it functions as exactly that. Erin sees Maddie on weekends. She sits across a kitchen table from Claire twice a week with a marriage counselor named Dr. Osei, who says, in their second session, a sentence that will follow Erin for the rest of her life. The tragedy in front of you isn't that you chose wrong once, it's that you built a system where choosing wrong was invisible until it wasn't. If you've made it this far, you already know this story isn't going to hand you the easy ending where everyone hugs it out and the marriage snaps back into place like nothing happened. Share this one with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe someone who's about to say, just this once, to a person they love. The real ending is coming, and it doesn't tie things up the way you might want it to. Erin does turn down the promotion, formally, in a meeting with Grant that goes about as coldly as she expects. Grant, to his credit or discredit depending on how you want to read it, does not pretend to be surprised. I did wonder, he says, almost offhand, signing something on his desk without looking up, whether you had the kind of situation at home that could absorb this. Some of the team figured you were solid for it, because you didn't seem to have the usual drag other people have. Kids, whatever. He says it lightly, as praise, the way you'd compliment a piece of equipment for its durability, and Erin sits across from him understanding, with a coldness of her own, that the very quality that had made her valuable to Grant, the appearance of having nothing that pulled at her, no anchor heavy enough to slow her down, had been built, brick by brick, out of her wife's silence and her daughter's paper airplanes, and that Grant had simply read the surface of that sacrifice as convenience, had never once wondered what it cost, because ugly numbers, as Priya had said, don't fit on the slide. She does not go back to the West Coast trajectory. She takes a lateral role instead, less travel, a title that will not impress anyone at a fundraiser, and if you are waiting for this decision to be the hinge that swings the story back open into something whole and repaired, I want to be honest with you the way this family had to learn to be honest with each other. It helps. It is not enough by itself to undo what 18 months of absence built. Claire and Maddie come home in November, 3 weeks before Maddie's actual, non-birthday ordinary Tuesday, chosen deliberately for its lack of occasion, because Claire says she is tired of every important thing in their family happening on a deadline. The house fills up again with the specific chaos of 3 clocks trying to run on the same day. But something that used to be simple between Erin and Claire does not fully come back. Claire still, sometimes, flinches very slightly when Erin's phone rings on a weekend, a small flinch that neither of them mentions, that both of them notice. Trust, it turns out, does not repair on the same timeline as a travel schedule. Some of it comes back changed shape, permanently, the way a bone that's been broken heals crooked no matter how well it's set. Maddie, for her part, folds Erin a paper airplane the week they come home, Not for a trip, there's no trip scheduled, which is itself new, and leaves it on Erin's side of the bed, the way she used to leave them on the pillow, years ago, when this whole ritual started. Erin unfolds it expecting, she'll admit later, something angry, something that would at least be simple to receive. Instead it says, in the same careful, proud handwriting, now a little more grown into itself at 10 years old than it had been at 8. I still want you to come to things, but I want you to want to, not just show up because you feel bad. Erin keeps that one in the fireproof box in the office closet, next to the adoption paperwork, the two documents that, between them, seem to Erin to contain the entire argument of her adult life. The proof that she legally, permanently belongs to this family, and the proof that belonging on paper and belonging in practice are not, in fact, the same thing, and that only one of them was ever actually in question. Here is what this story does not give you, because it would be a lie to give it to you. A scene where everyone cries and laughs, and the marriage is stronger than ever, better for having broken. That scene makes for a tidier ending, and it is not, in this family's case, the true one. What is true is quieter and harder to film. Erin now folds a paper airplane of her own, before every decision that requires her to choose between the two competing loves of her life. Not a wish, not a joke, usually just a single word, sometimes priorities, sometimes just Maddie, sometimes just look up, and keeps it in her coat pocket through the meeting, the negotiation, the moment where the old version of herself would have said yes before she'd finished the sentence in her own head. It does not always change her answer, but it changes how long it takes her to give one, and in a family that had come to measure love almost entirely in units of time, that pause, small as it looks from the outside, is the whole of what she has left to offer, as proof that something actually changed. Claire went back, eventually, and applied for that coordinator role, 2 years after she'd first deleted the confirmation email in a hospital parking lot with the engine running. She got it! She still works more hours than she used to. Erin, for her part, still travels sometimes. The job does not disappear. The ambition does not disappear. And this is not, in the end, a story that pretends ambition itself was the villain. It is a story about what a family quietly agrees to let ambition cost, without ever actually agreeing to it out loud, until a 10-year-old says the quiet part in the middle of an airport terminal, and there is nowhere left to look but directly at it. They are, as of this telling, still married, still in the same house, still, on good weeks, laughing at the same jokes they always laughed at, still, on bad weeks, careful with each other in a way that used to be unnecessary, and now simply is. What they lost, the version of themselves that did not know how close they had come to losing each other, the version that could still be surprised by a note on a kitchen island, does not come back. It is not the kind of thing that comes back. What Erin got to keep, instead, is smaller and stranger than the promotion she turned down. A habit of folding a small piece of paper before the decisions that matter most. A physical pause built into her hands so that her mind has time to catch up to her heart before her mouth says yes to the wrong thing again. So here is the question this story leaves you with, because I don't think it's mine to answer for you. How many just this once moments does it take before the people who love you stop believing there will ever be a different once? And if you're in the middle of one of those moments right now, mid-promotion, mid-trip, mid-explanation to someone small who is holding your hand a little too tightly at a gate somewhere, what would it actually cost you, today, to put the suitcase down? If this story found you at the right moment, that's not an accident, and it's not nothing. That like is a way of saying, I saw this. I recognize the Erin in me, or the Claire, or the kid folding something small out of something too big to hold. Share it with someone who needs to hear it before their own note ends up sitting alone on a kitchen island. And subscribe to the channel, because there are so many more stories like this one waiting to be told. Quiet ones, about the choices that never make it onto anyone's resume, but that decide, in the end, everything that actually mattered.